Guys, Bots and Gossip here. I've just watched some of the other fights from the Frampton Leo Santa Cruz build. This morning I only had the time to watch the main event, so in this video I'm going to cover Mikey Garcia versus Dejan Zlaticanin, and also UK-Scotland prospect Josh Taylor, who fought on the undercard. So first and foremost, Mikey Garcia versus Dejan Zlaticanin. Mikey Garcia wins the fight by third round knockout, and to be honest, it's hard to be anything but impressed by Garcia's performance. And to be honest, I was equally as impressed by the actual boxing and the build-up and the way he won the first two rounds than I was by the knockdown. By the knockout. For me, this was a big step forward actually for Mikey Garcia from his comeback fight, where potentially there were more signs of ring rust, more defensive openness. I thought Garcia looked very, very sound indeed against Zlaticanin, and in fact he made a very solid, very well regarded fighter in Zlaticanin look quite basic in there, quite route one, quite plodding. Garcia really showed his class. I think one of the things that was most impressive was his footwork, which is something that Carl Frost picked up on the commentary. I must say, having watched some of the undercard builds, I actually think it was a really good commentating performance from Carl Frost last night. But Mikey Garcia's footwork in there was exceptional. What it meant was that his judgment of range, his judgment of distance was really good. When he was throwing punches, he was just in range. When Zlaticanin was looking to come forward, Garcia was stepping out of range and making Zlaticanin fall short of the distance required to land the necessary punches. Garcia's jab was on point. He was throwing good power punches off the jab. He dropped to the body well. He could throw a real good 1-2 jab cross combination, and he was really working Zlaticanin. At the time of the stoppage, he had won the first two rounds, was en route to winning the third round very clearly. There was speed in his punch, there was snap in his punch. You could tell his punches were very heavy-handed, and Garcia really did look on form. He's clearly an elite fighter. Jorge Linares was ringside watching the bout. It was my understanding that the winner of Garcia versus Zlaticanin will face the winner of Crolla Linares. Obviously, as we know, Linares won that first fight against Anthony Crolla, and should Linares prevail in the rematch, I think Linares versus Mikey Garcia is a truly excellent match, and is a match that, for me, would already at this stage represent the number one and number two in the division. I actually think Linares would be a more difficult fight than Zlaticanin. I think Linares has more strings to his bow. I think he's more elusive. I think he's possibly got higher skill levels and a bit more flair than Zlaticanin. And I think Linares is really a sort of classier and more accomplished fighter all around. Having said that, based on what I saw last night, Linares is a guy who has had vulnerabilities associated with his name at various stages throughout his career. And, even though I'm a huge Linares fan and was so impressed by his performance against Crolla, you'd have to say maybe that Mikey Garcia would actually be a slight favourite to win that bout, actually. I've got to give a little bit of credit to my podcast colleague Irish Tom, because he's been, hyping Mikey Garcia on the podcast for an extended period of time. And, even though I'm not necessarily against Mikey Garcia, and I've not necessarily doubted Mikey Garcia, Tom's really been convinced that he was an elite world-class fighter for some time, and I think the manner with which that he's disposed of Zlaticanin there certainly tells you that he's an elite fighter at 135. The knockout itself, I kind of felt that Zlaticanin, I only saw the fight once, didn't see any replays, so I don't know whether he missed or, whether he was inaccurate, but Zlaticanin kind of turned his back, which is obviously a pretty rookie error in the sport of boxing, and Mikey Garcia basically had the opportunity to load up on a haymaker, on the inside, with Zlaticanin almost looking the wrong way, if that makes sense. It was nothing but Zlaticanin's fault. Mikey Garcia was absolutely right and within the rules to do what he did. But to be honest, once that punch was in orbit, Zlaticanin stood very little chance to make it out of there, and it was a truly chilling stoppage. Good to see Zlaticanin wake up, get on his stool and stand up, and seem to be okay at the end of the fight, because it was a very, very heavy stoppage. He looked like he was unconscious for an extended period of time, and clearly he was pretty badly hurt in there. So Garcia, a big punching guy at lightweight, a very, very strong technician in there, and someone with boxing pedigree to burn. Certainly a guy towards the top of the sport. On the undercard, Josh Taylor versus Alfonso Oliveira, a guy who was a very tough, durable, and actually quite an awkward opponent for Josh Taylor at this stage of his career. I believe the opponent had won 5 fights on the bounce. He was tall, he was rangy, he was awkward, he was beatable. He was a guy who was open, he was defensively frail, he was quite square on, his chin was up in the air, he backed up in straight lines. He was no world beater, the opponent, but what he was game as hell, durable as hell, and fairly awkward. And actually, he was one of these guys, when Alfonso Oliveira actually came forward and started getting his own work off, you could see that he was actually a decent fighter. But what he lacked was that sort of well-roundedness. His back foot game wasn't there. His defensive game wasn't there. You could see that if he was a fighter who was allowed to get on top and allowed to put punches together, he was actually a fairly capable operator. But when Josh Taylor was getting his work off, you could see that the gap in class was there. Taylor's punches were, as always, very hard, very fast, very snappy. He's got a superb variety of punches, Josh Taylor. He goes to the body well. He actually got a point docked for going below the belt a few times in the fight, so something he's got to be mindful of, because he did go below the belt unintentionally several times, but he's got a superb variety of punches. He's got a fantastic jab when he uses it. He throws a jab cross combination very well. He throws a lead hook very well. The guy's got class to burn. Realistically, I felt in this fight he was too hungry for the stoppage. From the early round, he was loading up. You can tell he was more inclined to focus on single punches, and he was hunting down that stoppage. Prior to this bout, he had a 100% KO ratio, and I assume he'd put great pressure on himself to maintain that and keep his streak alive going into the fight. At times, I kind of felt he neglected his boxing. There were rounds that were more difficult than they needed to be. If he had just used his jab and just used distance like we all know he's capable of, it would have been an easier night's work for him. And it actually developed into a bit of a scrap at times, this fight. And even though Josh Taylor won and won clearly, it was a more competitive fight than one would have necessarily suspected if you look at the two guys' backgrounds and build-ups, etc. So I did think Josh Taylor was a bit guilty of not using his boxing, and you could tell maybe it was the big occasion, fighting out in Vegas, etc, etc. But I kind of felt he neglected his jab a bit more than required, and he kind of got sucked into a bit of a scrap and neglected the distance that would be best for him to dominate in the fight. It was only his 8th or 9th fight, I believe. Very early stages in his career. Great experience for him to fight in Vegas on a bill of this nature. So, credit to him there. But perhaps this bill shows, a lot of us in the UK are massive fans of Josh Taylor. I'm a massive fan of Josh Taylor. I believe he's the truth, and I believe he can be a world-level fighter. But I guess this fight showed that, he's not there yet. A lot of UK fans, including myself, were extremely taken with the way he beat Dave Ryan. But I guess if you look at Dave Ryan's profile, he's perhaps in the autumn of his career. He'd been inactive for a long time prior to that fight with Josh Taylor, and it's maybe in hindsight one could say that Dave Ryan wasn't necessarily the Dave Ryan of old, because this Alfonso Oliveira, who I think his record was 8-2 going into the fight, he caused a few problems for Josh Taylor, and a lot of that was just that he was awkward and very, very durable. But for me, the fight kind of showed that whilst Josh Taylor is a very, very highly regarded blue chip prospect, there's still something to work on, and he's relatively young in his pro career. There's still more experience to get under the belt, and if he keeps progressing, if he keeps being in these fights where he gets the good learning experiences and is going up against guys who give him rounds, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with in 2 or 3 years' time, and I've got no doubt that he can get to the world level and world title level and elite level if he's managed correctly. Let me know your thoughts, guys, both on the Mikey Garcia Dejan Zlaticanin fight, and also on the Josh Taylor fight. I did a video this morning, Sunday morning, on Frampton versus Leo Santa Cruz and my thoughts after that fight. So if you haven't already, please take the time to view that video. If you've enjoyed this one, hit the thumbs up button, and please take the time to subscribe. Many thanks for tuning in.